Okay, so we're getting into Isaiah tonight. Flip on a Bible over to Isaiah chapter 9. We're going to be in Isaiah 9, final week in our Isaiah Arrival series. And I'm really excited to wrap this series up. It's been probably the most challenging Christmas series I've preached. If you're wondering, if you want insight into the life of a pastor, holiday messages, anything around holidays, is very difficult to preach because everybody knows them. A lot of people go to church on Christmas. They know the message. But what we wanted to do in this series was try to take a slightly different angle to say, why did Jesus have to come? What was the context, the world that he came into? So the first 2 weeks we were in Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 42. This week we're going all the way back to the beginning of the book, which is a completely different period in history than the second two. We're in Isaiah 9, and if you're wondering a little bit of context for you tonight, Isaiah 40 and 42 were after the people of Israel had been exiled. In Isaiah 9, we are before they have been exiled. So the tone of the book is a little bit more dire. I was talking to my wife this morning about Isaiah and the message I was going to preach, and so she flipped on over and read Isaiah 9 and was like, it's a little bit gloomy. I was like, it's not, I promise it's not. We're gonna make it hopeful. So tonight we are gonna find a way to draw light and goodness out of what is perhaps a little bit of a gloomy passage. And I promise you will not leave gloomy this evening. You will leave full of joy and hope as we dive into the scriptures together. So let's just take a moment and pray. Jesus, I just praise you that we get to derive joy and hope and goodness from your scriptures. And Father, I pray right now as we dive into Isaiah chapter 9 and Matthew chapter 4, God, that you would encourage us, that you would speak life into this place, into this room tonight. Amen. Awesome. Well, quick question before we get in. Who's afraid of the dark? Okay, I just changed my preaching series. We're going to do a preaching series on honesty in January. Well, the truth is I am somewhat afraid of the dark sometimes. I ride my bike at night. Some people call me crazy. But often when I'm riding at night, I'll be riding through the trails by myself, and my mind starts to play games with me. And I start envisioning like giant human-sized raccoons scurrying out of the forest, jumping at me, attacking me off the bike, and then eating me for breakfast. And I have this vision of these demonic raccoons chasing me through the forest. It's funny how we get into these things when we get into a dark situation, our mind starts to play games with us. I don't know if anyone has I remember as a kid, I used to have to go down into the basement, and I hated going into the basement. And every time I went into the basement, I always had this sense that the snake was going to chase me up the stairs and eat me in the basement. Does anybody else have a fear of is that just me? Somebody else? Okay, I saw a couple hands. Okay, we're good. The honesty thing's getting there. Darkness is a funny thing, isn't it? But when we read in Isaiah 9, it's actually setting up a bit of a dichotomy between the light and the dark, between the light and the dark. So check it out. We're going to read Isaiah 9, 1 to 11. It's going to be on the screens. There it is. All right, nevertheless, the time of darkness. Everybody say darkness. And despair will not go on forever. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali will be humbled. But there will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which lies along the road that runs between the Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. The people who walk in darkness, say darkness, will see a great light. Say light with more vigor. There we go, it's good. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. They will rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, and like warriors dividing the plunder. For you will break the yoke of slavery and lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. You will break the oppressor's rod, just as you did when you destroyed the army of Midian. The boots of the warrior and the uniforms bloodstained by war will all be burned, and they will be fuel for the fire. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end, and he will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of his ancestor David for all eternity. The passionate commitment of the Lord of heaven's armies will make this happen. All right, Isaiah 9, there it is. So let me ask you a question. When you reflect back on 2016, when you look back on the year that has been, did it go according to plan? Did it pan out the way you thought it was? You got to think back. I know it's a long time ago. Think back all the way to 2015 this time. And as you were looking forward, some of you are like, I'm just trying to make it through next week, never mind next year. But for the visionaries in the room, a year ago when you were looking forward into 2016, what did you see? As you maybe you're a journaler, maybe you're somebody that writes things down. What did you write down? What did you long to see? I'm sure some of you had dreams of getting fit, and some of you, I'm sure, had dreams of making $1 million. I got a call this week. Somebody called me up and they said, my goal in life is to make $1 million by the time I'm 35. And I said to them, why not make it 2? And they were like, you know what, you're right. Let's make it 2. It's like, if you're going to dream. But when you think back on this year, what do you think on? Did it go according to plan? Did you succeed in your goals? Did it make sense? Do you have questions that you were asking in 2015 answered? Did you see them answered in 2016? But let me ask you kind of a somewhat existential question. How do you know? If it went good, how do you know it went good? And if it went poorly, how do you know it went poorly? Some of you are like, I don't need to think about that. That's not a complicated question. But when we look at our lives and we look at our dreams and we goals, how do we measure things? How do we measure progress? How do we measure where we're going versus where we've come from? And since I'm asking questions, let me ask this question. Where are you going in 2017? Where are you going? What's your plan? What's on your heart right now as you look forward into the year? What are the dreams that are being cultivated? Maybe some of you in this room don't have any dreams for the coming year. And if nothing else, I pray tonight that you walk out with some kind of seed of a dream that hopefully will sprout and give life to those around you. Imagine that if our dreams and the goal of our own visions was to give life to the people around us. That'd be pretty sweet, right? Anyway, that's not what my sermon's about. When we go through these seasons of looking back and looking forward and we think about Christmas, we're going to tie this all together tonight. But when we look back on the year and we look forward to the year, maybe the word that describes it is darkness for you. It was a year where you didn't know where you were going. It was filled with uncertainty. You didn't know what was going to happen. Things didn't go according to plan. There were hiccups along the road. You couldn't seem to see more than a week ahead. You were living just so that you could survive tomorrow. Maybe it was the word light. Maybe the last year for you was a year where as you looked forward, it was filled with hope and God did incredible things in your life and you saw new things come to life and you were able to see and plan ahead and envision things down the road. I don't know where you're at in this room. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle. You had days that you would describe with the word light and days that you would describe with the word darkness. See, in this passage of Scripture, what Isaiah does when he opens it up is he introduces this dichotomy, this kind of coin with two sides, the light and the dark. Check it out, verse 2, it says this: the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. Isaiah is looking into the future and he's saying there's going to be a moment where out of the darkness, God is going to bring life and bring light, where he's going to take that confusion and turn it on its head. But what is that darkness? How do we know? What does it look like? Well, I was saying earlier that I ride my bike at night. And I was thinking about it. Well, if I turn my lights off, which sometimes I do like a bit of a dummy, and I'll ride and kind of just by moonlight, not very fast. And as I'm riding, it's interesting. The light, when it's on, illuminates the way in front of me so that I can see where I'm going. One of the things that light does in our worlds is it helps us see the road ahead. Plan, see obstacles, navigate things. The second thing that it does is it keeps the fear of the giant raccoons at bay, because I can just shine the light on my head and be like, there's no raccoon there, we're good. There's a giant deer over there that's coming for me and I need to get out of the way. That happened last week. There was a gigantic deer with antlers about 10 feet from me, and I was convinced he was just going to bowl me over like a bowling pin. But it's okay, I got out of the way. I'm still here, we're good. See, light has this way of illuminating the way in front of us. It has this way of quelling our fears. It helps us see where we're going. And in a way, it actually protects us. It helps identify things that might harm us and get them out of the way. You see, when light shines on something, it exposes it for what it really is. It helps us see things how they really are. And what Isaiah is describing in this passage is a situation where out of the darkness of our lives, a light is going to come. Out of the darkness and confusion, and I just defined it for you, it's fear. It's lack of direction. It's an inability to see ahead of you and plan and have visions for the future. It's feeling out of control. Out of that, a light is going to shine and give hope. Instead of fear, there will be joy. So what he does is he sets up this contrast. He says, for those who live in a land of deep darkness, for those of you, maybe you're in the room tonight, for those of you that have come out of a place that you would describe as deep darkness, a light is going to shine, is what Isaiah is looking into the future and predicting. So what does this have to do with Christmas? It's like, Robin, this is good. This is metaphors. You're defining some very simple metaphor for us tonight, light and darkness. What does this have to do with Christmas? Well, actually, the people of Israel never saw this fulfilled in their world. In fact, they were hauled off to exile, as we learned about the last 2 weeks. And out of that exile, they were never really restored to a great nation. They continued to live in this sense of darkness. And it was into that world that Jesus was born. It was into that context that Jesus comes. Into that darkness, into that confusion, into that lack of direction, into that feeling like there is no future. If you go and read literature from the 1st and 2nd century BC, you'll know that that was pretty much what was going on. So check it out. Matthew 4 says this in verse 13. In the region of Zebulun and Naphtali, this fulfilled what God said through the prophet Isaiah. In the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. So actually, if we back up to verse 12, it says this. When Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He went first to Nazareth and then left there and moved to Capernaum, beside the Sea of Galilee, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. And this fulfilled what God had said through the prophet Isaiah. So here's what happens. About 800 years later, 500 years later, depends on which historian you want to follow, Jesus lands on the scene. And Matthew quotes and says, this is the fulfillment, this hope that we were looking for, this light that would shine in the darkness is realized in this person named Jesus. And then he goes to quote Isaiah chapter 9, word for word. And so the question I want to ask is, in what way does Jesus, the great light, actually start to shine to provide direction and clarity and future and hope and goodness of the kind that Isaiah was predicting? In what way does Jesus fulfill it? So if it's all right with you guys, what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to do it 20 minutes. Say 20 minutes. And then say accountable. We're going to go for it. We're going to try. No promises. But you guys are going to hold me accountable. What I want to do is I want to show how Jesus fulfills what Isaiah was predicting in that passage. So let's check it out. Verse 3 of Isaiah says this. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. They will rejoice before you as a people rejoice at the harvest, and like warriors dividing the plunder. What does that have to do with Jesus? You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. Well, if you drop down a few verses, you will see that Isaiah gives a number of titles to Jesus. He didn't know he was giving them specifically to Jesus, but as Matthew co-opts the passage, so do the titles co-opt to Jesus. And so the first title there is Wonderful Counselor. Wonderful Counselor. Okay, what does a wonderful counselor have to do with enlarging the nation of Israel? Like, how does that fit together? Well, the word counselor here is not therapist. Jesus is not your therapist. You heard it at church tonight. What does that word counselor mean? The word counselor there is like wise counsel, insight, and strategy. It's a manner in which this wonderful counselor gives direction to help navigate life, to help steer through things. So if you take this and you apply it to a nation, if a nation is being effective in the nation of Israel, it's doing its job. What's going to happen if they start to listen to wise counsel? The nation is going to grow. The nation is going to expand. It's a little bit of Bible study for you tonight. So it says, you will enlarge the nation of Israel. In other words, this wonderful counselor will speak life into your world so that you can know where to go. I think many times when we think of Jesus, we think of Jesus' job as being to simply encourage us or just, tell us, good job, or I have more for you, or I have life for you. And we do believe those things as a church, but if we only reduce Jesus down to just being like a kind of a feel-good pick-me-up, then we are missing the life-giving goodness of what it means when Jesus is wonderful counselor. You see, what it means is that we start to say, Jesus, what would you have me do with my life? What counsel do you have for me? You see, when the light starts to shine in the darkness, and we listen to the counselor, we start to know the way that we are being called to take. Years ago when I was in high school, I apparently had a sleepwalking issue. Thankfully, I think that's mostly sorted itself out. My wife, I think, can confirm that. Anyway, I was at a cottage and we were sleeping, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was, for whatever reason, convinced I was in the wrong cottage. It was one of those weird, like, semi-awake things where I thought I was in one place, but I actually wasn't. And I woke up, and I was like, I got to get back to the cottage. And so I busted out through the door and started hiking through the forest at, like, probably 2 or 3 in the morning. And I'm hiking through the forest, and I have this distinct memory of wandering through the forest, being convinced that I was going from the wrong cottage to the right cottage. And so I arrive at this cottage in the middle of the night, and I start banging on the door. And I'm trying to let myself in. I'm like, why the heck can't I let myself into this cottage? Who locked me out of my own cottage? What is going on? And I'm banging on the door. And then I thought, well, I can't get in, so the next best thing I'm going to do is go for a swim. And so I wandered down to the dock, and I'm standing on the edge of the dock, kind of like this, about ready to jump into the lake at 3 in the morning. The problem is I wasn't conscious. I imagine I probably would have had a very rude awakening had I jumped. But it was this hilarious, it turns out later that there was some poor old lady in the cottage, and I was giving her a heart attack. Why can't I get in? Let me in. I found out the next day, I went over and apologized. Like, I'm so sorry. But I heard my dad calling at me. I'm standing on the dock, and I see him come with his flashlight, and he's calling at me. He's like, Robin, don't jump. I'm like, what do you mean don't jump? I'm going for a swim. See, in that moment, my dad comes with the light, and he wakes me up, and I realize, what the heck am I doing on the end of a dock? The human body and the mind is an incredible thing. But you see, when we start to listen to this wise counselor, he allows us to actually kind of wake up out of the darkness and start to see that actually the way we are going is not the way that we think we are going. When we stumble in the darkness, we lose our way. But this wonderful counselor comes and says, hey, I have a better way for you. I have a better direction for you. Hey, you don't want to go that way. You want to go this way. But how many of us, when we come to Jesus and we think of Jesus as wonderful counselor, we treat it as optional? We go, Jesus, I'll listen to you as long as it fits my plan and my perspective onto the world. And you see what Jesus is saying is, it's like you're standing on a dock about to jump into a lake, and you're completely unaware. Let me wake you up. Let me show you the way. It's interesting. This is the second time that I've preached this point in this series, if you've been paying attention. That we need to stop simply saying we follow Jesus and actually start following Jesus' instructions. But the challenge is that this is unavoidable in the narrative of Isaiah. Because in Isaiah, there's a constant return. Listen to what God is doing. Listen to what God is saying. Listen, listen, listen. There is wise counsel. Will you listen? In verse 17 of chapter 4, this is what Jesus says. And you see, it makes a whole pile of sense now. And then Jesus began to preach, repent of your sins and turn to God, for the kingdom of heaven is near. In other words, let me show you a better way. Stop going this direction. Let me show you a better way. There is more life for you in the way that I would have for you. Allow me to be the wise counsel. But we don't really like repentance. We don't really like the subject. We like Jesus as encourager. We don't like Jesus as counselor. And so my simple question is this. When we talk of Jesus being the wise counsel, do you know what he is counseling you in? Like, that's a weird sentence, Robin. Let me ask you more simply. Do you know what Jesus says? Do you know it? See, the thing with Jesus is that we don't follow sort of this abstract mythological idea. We follow a person who lived in the first century and spoke words of life and encouragement. He spoke words of challenge. He said some very specific things. And the question is, do you know what he says, or do you simply know what other people say he says? If the only source for Jesus' words come from me, then you're not following Jesus, you're following me. And I have no interest in having followers. I want people to follow Jesus. My challenge to us as a church is real simple right now. This Christmas, as we take a break, as you maybe get some time off work, I hope you work for a company that's nice. Get some break from school, whatever's going on in your world. I hope you take time. And let's read as a church the book of Mark together. It's a short gospel. And it gives us Jesus' very specific, very tangible words. You see, it's not enough to say, Jesus, be my counselor, and then have no clue what Jesus says. But this is where we often line up. We go, Jesus, I follow you. I just have no idea what you say. It's not enough to call ourselves Jesus followers unless we actually follow Jesus. And you see, following Jesus is simultaneously an incredibly simple thing that even children can understand. His words are not complicated. They're not over our heads. We can come to them and have life spoken into us, even if we just give them a few moments a day. But on the flip side, a lifetime of study will not mind all the things and the depths and riches that Jesus has for your life. I have read the Gospels more times than I can count, and every time I read them, I leave going, I had no idea it said that. Because as I read it again, God gives fresh perspective. So come on, church, let's get back into the Word this Christmas. Let's figure out, Jesus, what are you really saying in my world? See, in order for Jesus to be the wonderful counselor, he needs to have the number one seat of authority in our lives. When you look at your decision-making matrix, who's at the top? Who's the most significant voice in your life? You're like, I'm my own matrix. I'm my own voice. Sorry, we got a sermon on pride coming up. It's going to be good. Who's that? Who holds that place? And when Isaiah says this wonderful counselor who's going to help you enlarge your nation, it means you actually have to listen to him. All right, that's verse 3. We got 4 more to go in 10 minutes. Oh, Lord, have mercy. All right, check it out. Verse 4. For you will break the yoke of slavery and lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. For you will break the yoke of slavery and lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. So this is the second thing. If you're actually tracking with me, I'm following the you statements in Isaiah. Isaiah 9 has these statements where it goes, you, God, will do this. You, this Messiah that's going to come, will accomplish this. You will break the yoke of slavery and lift the heavy burden. So there's this dual picture here. This picture of slavery, of being shackled, of being unable to kind of go beyond what your shackles and chains hold you in. And this other image of carrying something really heavy. Like walking with something heavy. So whoever this is, they're shackled and they're like carrying something really heavy. So it's just brutal, right? Unable to move. The imagery here, the picture here is of a people that are unable to walk in the freedom and in the joy and in the purposes that God has called them to. You see, the thing with slavery is that when we are slaves to something, our potential and purpose is limited by that which we are enslaved to. Let me say that again. When we are enslaved to something, our potential and purpose is limited to what we are enslaved to. And this is why in Romans chapter 6, you can go and read it, Paul says that we are slaves to whatever we obey. We are limited by the things that we follow. The picture here is of a people whose potential and freedom is limited by that which they are enslaved to. And what Jesus and what Isaiah says is that there's going to be one who's going to come, who is going to break open the potential, who's going to break free from the shackles of slavery and lift this heavy burden so that you as a people will start to walk in the fullness of what God would have for you. You see, if you think about it, the opposite of slavery is what? Freedom. And in freedom there is purpose and significance. Slavery limits. And God says, I'm going to break that free. Sometimes I think when we think of slavery, and certainly if you read Romans 6, this is the case, that it's generally talking about a theme centered around sin or brokenness or something like that. But you see, I don't believe that we were simply saved or encounter Jesus so that we can not do something. It's not enough to be a people that stop sinning, to stop doing things. The picture here is not of a people that simply are freed from slavery and then sit around going, I don't know what I'm called to do now. Oh, check it out. No, the idea is a vision of a people that would be intentional and purposeful. In Matthew 4, Matthew gives a picture of how this functions with Jesus. Check it out, Matthew 4:19. Jesus called out to them and he said, come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets at once and followed him. See what Jesus does when he comes as this light, as this mighty God that sets us free from slavery. He doesn't just set us free from He doesn't just set us free from slavery. He calls us into a new purpose, into a greater purpose. You see, one of the primary things that Jesus does when he steps foot into the world is he starts to say, you, come with me. And you, come with me. And we're going to go and we're going to do something incredible. We're going to go and fish for people. We're going to go and see lives changed. But how many of us, in our view of what Jesus can do in our world, is limited to just, God, save me from my sin? And we have no sense of, almighty God, call me into freedom and call me into purpose. We limit God's capacity to just saving us from our brokenness, not calling us into purposefulness. I have a lot of coffees I've had a lot of coffees over the years with people that feel purposeless. If you didn't know, one of the jobs of a pastor, if you're new to this church thing, one of the jobs of a pastor is to help care for and encourage people. We're not counselors, but we do sit down and hear people and say, hey, I believe there's more for you in your life. And over the years, as I've done this and invested into people and heard their story, I hear people that are stuck saying, I feel purposeless. I feel directionless. I feel, and in my mind, I'm going, you feel enslaved. See, sometimes what we do is we put our lives on autopilot. We go, well, I'm just going to do what I've just been told to do. I'm just going to do what I've been shown to do. I'm just gonna go through life, and I'm going to pick up the job, and I hope I pan things out okay. And then we sit asking the question, what's it all for? Especially when things get hard, we start to ask the question, what's it all for? And what if we start to pick up Jesus' words and he says, hey, come follow me, and I'm going to teach you to fish for people. I'm going to teach you not to live a life of purposelessness, but a life of purposefulness. Church, do not in 2017 put your life on autopilot. Don't put your dreams and the things that you're longing for just into cruise control and just go through life going, I don't know if I'm called to much. I believe that what Isaiah is painting a picture of here is not just freeing us from slavery, but a God that calls us into life and life abundant. What are the dreams that God is putting on your heart? I need to be very, very clear here. Every single one of you in this place right now, say me. Point to yourself and say me. Me. Or I. Let's go with I. I have a call to ministry. You, wherever you are in this place, you have a call and a gifting and a mandate from Jesus to continue doing what he has done. The calling to ministry is not reserved for the people that stand on stage. It's not reserved for the people that lead organizations. Every single one of you has a call, and Jesus is saying, come, follow me, and I'm going to teach you to fish for people. I'm going to teach you, I'm going to put some dreams in your hearts. You know what I would love to see in our church? I would love to see some companies get founded in 2017. I would love to see our Serve Our City initiatives go to the next level, where we start to train people and educate people and commission people to freedom. I would love to see a church that is on the vanguard of saying, this is what it looks like to follow Jesus. We're not going to follow Jesus into what is comfortable. We're going to follow Jesus into that which is challenging and life-giving and purposeful. The problem is I got at least another 30 minutes of content here. But you see, there's so much that I believe is in this text. I haven't even begun to unpack what everlasting Father looks like and what Prince of Peace looks like. What if we start to get a hold of what it looks like to follow Jesus, of what it looks like to say, Jesus, I'm actually going to follow you in 2017. I'm actually going to start to chase after the things that you have for me. It says you will break the oppressor's rod just as you did when you destroyed the army of Midian. The oppressor's rod was the result of the people not following Jesus, not following God. And so what happens is they fall into exile. And God says, I'm going to break that exile over you. See, the exile was a response for not following. And what God says in this promise through Jesus is that instead of being stuck in a situation where we are shackled to the decisions that we have made, I want to set you free. I want to call you to life and life abundant. I'm going to close with just a bit of a story, a bit of a personal moment here. A year ago, in 2015, today, actually, to the day. I was on a plane to South Africa to see my family. And I went to South Africa after the busiest fall of our year, or of our life as a church. And I was exhausted. My voice was shot from preaching. I didn't have a whole lot left in the tank. And I went to South Africa and I was like, God, I've been chasing after you. I need you to refresh me. And the truth is that 2016 has been the most challenging year that I have faced in ministry. It's been the most challenging year that we have faced as a church. But I believe what has been happening is Jesus has been shaping us as a community. He's been building us to do a new thing, to accomplish a new thing. And we've been learning what it means to be a church that follows Jesus. We've been learning what it means to be a church that is established on this university campus. And over the last kind of month or so, I've been doing a lot of praying. Going, God, what do you have for us in 2017? A year ago, I was simply going, God, I just hope that I can survive 2016. But I believe right now that God is calling this church to something incredible. And when I say this church, I don't mean me. I mean you. I mean each person here. We are called as a church to step into something great in the coming year. To step into something new. It'd be great to step out of the darkness and into the light. That was perfect. That's awesome. So church, if maybe you're sitting going, I feel like I've lost my way, I've lost direction, I want you to know tonight that Jesus is saying, I'm calling you to more. I am calling you to more. I have life and I have goodness. And the two things that I've been able to preach out of this message tonight that I've actually been able to get through is number one is, will you allow Jesus to be your counselor? And number two, will you allow him to be your mighty God to call you into purpose? So what I want to do is we're going to go into a bit of a moment of worship, but I want us to bow our heads first. Let me bow our heads. If that's you and you're saying, I feel like I've lost my way. The 2016 was a year of being wandering in the darkness. My encouragement to you is that Jesus is saying, allow me to be your counselor. Allow me to be the light that shines in the darkness to draw out life and goodness. If that's you and you're saying, I feel like I've been stuck and I need Jesus to be that counsel in my life. If that's you, why don't you put up your hand? Yeah, everywhere. Awesome. Put it down once it's up. The second one is, if you're sitting there and you're saying tonight, I want to see Jesus do something in my life in 2017. If your prayer is, Lord, give me a dream, give me a vision, help me to see potential. Help me to learn to start to see life as you see it. If that's you in this place, why don't you throw up your hand? If you say, yeah, I want Jesus to give me dreams. Yeah, that's almost every hand in this place. Yeah. I believe Jesus has a dream for you tonight. He has a vision for you tonight. He's saying, follow me and I will make you a fisher of men. So before we just go into a moment of worship, I want to pray. Why don't we stand to our feet as we pray tonight? Jesus, I ask that you would do an incredible thing in this church. God, that you would give life and joy and hope and goodness. God, that for those that are stuck, Jesus, that you would call life out in this place. God, for those that have felt that they are stuck in the darkness, Jesus, I pray that you would be a God that brings life and light into the midst of the darkness. God, that 2017 will be a year of boldly taking steps into the things that you have. So as we close tonight, I want to just go into a time of worship.